Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another wonderful 6-week course by the Jewish Learning Institute, the JLI, and this new course is Journey of the Soul. We are going to be talking about death, afterlife, reincarnation, grief, Shiva, Kaddish, all the fun stuff that people love talking about. So, there's a priest and a minister and a rabbi that were chatting once. They're sitting around talking, and they're talking about what they'd like to have said at their funeral. And the priest said, he said, I would like that at my funeral they should say that I was a man of God who lived in perfect faith. The minister says, at my funeral, I would like them to say that I was a great community motivator and activist that shared and engaged with everybody, engaged with kindness. And the rabbi thinks to himself, and he says, at my funeral, I want them to say, look, he's moving. It's great when you're on mute and you tell a joke. It gets me every time. So that's, I think we might have a sense, Jews are concerned with life, I think. There's a little spoiler for tonight's class. But the subject of death and our mortality is a bit of a taboo subject, I think you can say. Some people are fascinated with it and love talking about it. Other people want to want no part of it. There's an old Yiddish saying that if a rumor goes out about somebody that they've passed away, it's an omen for a long life. They also say that writing a will is an omen for a long life. So, when we deal with death, people are sometimes a little hesitant, a little nervous, but obviously everybody here tonight, it's an important topic, as we will hopefully discover over the next 6 weeks. And really, our course is not so much about death, even though that's what we'll be, talking about, as much as it is really about life. And hopefully that'll be apparent in each and every one of these 6 classes. So let's jump right in. Why is this topic an important topic? Why is this a topic that people are fascinated with? We all have our opinions about that. I can maybe open it up if anybody wants to jump in and give their personal feeling on why they wanted to join tonight's class, what drew them to tonight's class, to this course, and to the subject. So if anybody wants to share, I'd invite you to unmute yourself now, and you could share about what drew you to this topic. Anybody? You have to unmute yourself first.
I think for me, at least, this is almost like the biggest question. I mean, we're all going to go, and so kind of what happens afterwards, or what to expect, and how that kind of impacts your life. For me, at least, is kind of the biggest, or one of the biggest kind of eternal questions. So certainly,
So is it a curiosity or is it a fear of the unknown?
No, I don't. Listen. I maybe I should have a fear of the unknown. I don't know. But I mean, for me, I think it's mostly a drive of curiosity.
Okay.
I mean, personally, kind of a drive of curiosity. I mean, if at least for me, and this is obviously a very personal thing, but right. if you have a belief that it doesn't just end, that it really is a wonder about what's coming, and so that's the curiosity about what to expect, as much as we can know about what to expect in that regard. So that's at least for me.
Okay. Farah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Farah. I don't know all of you. The only one I know are you, Rabbi Friedman and Susan. So I welcome myself to you all. Hi. What drew me to this topic was my father just passed away. December 8th. So it's like he was here December 7th, And then just embrace he's no longer here. But where is he? Where did he go? Where is his spirit? Where is he's what happens next? And it's just hard for me to believe that he just was laid to rest and that's the end of it. And I just feel signs of him often. And where does the soul go? What does this mean? And it made me reevaluate a lot of life, what living is about through this death experience. So that's what drew me to this experience and wanting to take the JLI course.
Great. Okay, thanks for, I mean, it's a way to break the ice with everybody. A bunch of people don't know each other and to get really personal. So I love it. Thank you so much.
I'm sorry. I can't
No,
take it
that's
back
great.
now.
On the contrary,
well.
that's exactly what I was looking for. So thank you, Farah. Thank you. Anybody else want to share?
I think also, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
This past year has been, that's the issue that's been up for the world, for the entire world. It's been a race against death. Normally we're involved in our lives and it's something, it's always there, the consciousness, the awareness, sometimes more, sometimes less. But this is a daily, in your face race against death. And so, especially those of us that have been isolated and in the house more than usual, and you're alone with your thoughts, and so you confront things that you don't normally confront.
Right.
So it's up. The issue is up, and it's good to face it, good to talk about it, and demystify it if we can.
Right. Okay, great. So I mean, I think everything that was brought up is going to hopefully be clarified and explored during this course. As you all alluded to, we have some intellectual questions, philosophical questions about death, and then also the meaning of life and what happens after death. There's a curiosity, there's the philosophy of it. It could really present some real difficult philosophical questions for people. Then, of course, there's the emotional component of it when somebody experiences loss, or either the loss of a loved one or grappling with their own mortality, which, both Farah and Lois, you both sort of alluded to different elements of that emotional aspect of it. Then there's also the practical, the nuts and bolts of Jewish mourning rituals and the way we mark sort of the passing of a person to another world. All of these are topics. So the philosophical, the emotional, and the practical and technical. We're going to address all of that over the course of the next 6 weeks. Now, today, though, what we're going to talk about, we're going to start today is really a general perspective on the Jewish view of death, essentially. That'll really set the tone, I think, for this course, is really what is the Jewish view on the subject. Death could be scary, it's painful, it's final, at least, right? We would think, it seems like it's kind of final. If we don't know what happens on the other side, that could be scary. People have been locked up, and death has been all around us, certainly for the last year. And, as human beings, we have self-awareness, which means that we can see ourselves sort of in the abstract. We can almost take like a step outside of ourselves and view ourselves and our lives, sort of detached from ourselves, which really allows us to see how fickle life is, right? That the fact that we can conceive of reality, of existence outside of ourselves, right? And recognize where we fit sort of in the massive history of the universe, like we're just a speck. And so that could be overwhelming, certainly. And so people, this is a subject people either choose to repress, not to think about. Some people choose to embrace it. But it's something that at one point or another, it's something we're all going to have to grapple with. A good friend, Mark Rosenberg, the president at FIU, once said to me, his dad would always say that nobody gets out of this life alive. So we're all gonna have to pay our taxes at some point. And so so it's really an important topic. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to jump in. Let's take a look at text 1, just to help us set the stage here, okay? And if there's a volunteer to read, okay, here we got thanatophobia, because we want to start with a phobia. And thanatophobia is really the fear of death is really the extreme end of people's attitude towards death, where it's something that paralyzes them and really limits their ability to live because of their overwhelming fear of death. So let's look at here at text 1. You can see already at the PDF that the new textbook is unlike any of the old ones. It's really beautiful. You're all going to enjoy it tremendously. But let's take a look here at text 1. Do we have a volunteer to read text 1? Am I volunteering myself? Is that what's about to happen? Okay, that's fine. Okay. Mortality has haunted us this is from Irvin Yalom, staring at the sun, overcoming the terror of death. Okay, he is his bio says that he is a pioneer in the area of existential psychotherapy, and he deals with death is a field of expertise. Okay, so he says like this: mortality has haunted us from the beginning of history. For 4,000 years ago, the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh reflected on the death of his friend Enkidu with the words, "Thou hast become dark and cannot hear. Hear me. When I die, shall I not be like Enkidu? Sorrow enters my heart. I am afraid of death." Right? This is a poem from 4,000 years ago, right? From the Sumerian people. So we're talking pre-Abraham's times. This is a long time ago. This is pretty much from the dawn of human civilization, or not long after we appear. So already this is going on. Gilgamesh speaks for all of us. As he feared death, so do we all, each and every man, woman, and child. For some of us, the fear of death manifests only indirectly, either as generalized unrest or masquerading as another psychological symptom. Other individuals experience an explicit and conscious stream of anxiety about death. And for some of us, the fear of death erupts into terror that negates all happiness and fulfillment. Okay, so, and here we have a nice, beautiful, colorful chart where you can see that 42% of US adults surveyed have either somewhat or are very afraid of death, right? 42%, right? 26% did not. Well, only 25, or let's read it another way, only 25% of the people surveyed are not at all afraid of death. Okay, so that means that that it's common for people to fear death. Okay, let's stop it right here, and we'll come back to the text in a moment. So this is something that people are afraid of, right? COVID-19 certainly didn't do us any favors. We're all sort of come face to face and confront our own mortality. And CNN ran a story about they reported about the increase in depression, right, and anxiety, and all of these things that have been caused by people having death loom over their heads. When you come face to face with this, when it's hard to ignore it, it's something that can lead to depression, to anxiety, and so on and so forth. So this is something that we have to understand. What is the Jewish perspective of it? The joke that I opened tonight's class with was a little leading, right? Because you would think, it seems from that joke, the implication is that we'd sort of take a humorous approach to it. So that's, again, a little spoiler for where we're going to go in tonight's class, but let's try and make our way through this. Okay. So what's the Jewish perspective on death? The Jewish perspective on death is that death is basically a new phase of life. That something that is alive can't really die. And that when a person passes away, they continue to live on. Now we're going to have to understand exactly what that means. But really, before we can do that, we have to really understand what life means. So if we're assuming here that we know that death is the end of life, right? But first we have to really know what is life. And if we can know what life is, then we can understand that statement about death being another stage or another phase of our lives. Now, this idea of life, of defining life, is something that is hard to. It's not something that we can really perceive. It's not something that we can see and touch. Let's jump into a mystical text here. I'm gonna share my screen with by the leading one of the foremost students of Rabbi Isaac Luria, who wrote his teachings, all of the writings of Lurianic Kabbalah, authored by Rabbi Isaac Luria, the great Kabbalist, were recorded by his student, Rabbi Chaim Vital. So he says like this in text 2. The wise are aware that the human body is not the human being. When we speak of the human being, we are referring to the human's inner dimension. The body is merely a garment in which the soul is attired during its sojourn in this world. Okay? So that's the statement by the mystics, that the life is really the soul, right? So who am I? I am a soul. That's what I am, a soul, not a body. Now, we could do a meditation, or I can just share this idea. I'm debating what to do. I can't gauge from everybody's faces. Let me just share this idea. Oh, Farah wants the meditation. Okay, so I'm going to share meditation. Here we're going to go. We're going to watch this video together, a little video meditation, okay? Let me see. I got to open this up first. Here we go. Meditation. Now, hang on. Bear with me, everybody. Share my screen. Here we go. Okay. Let's watch this to get a sense of what the text we just read, what exactly does this mean? And let's try and delve into this. Here we go.
Hi, this is Rabbi Shestab. Welcome to a series of meditations for the course Journey of the Soul. The purpose of these meditations is going to be internalizing some of the deeper ideas that are a little bit difficult to grasp. And generally, we will try to do so by way of visualization, trying to picture symbols that represent some of the ideas and that we can focus on briefly so that we can begin to connect on a deeper level to these ideas. To begin with, the entire notion of life is a challenging concept because it is so intangible. We're used to relating to things, to that which we can see, to that which we can touch. And life is completely intangible. How do we begin to relate to
Oh no. Is our internet slow? Let's try that again. Okay. Everybody's with me, but I think my internet just kind of slowed down on the video, or I don't know. So, okay, Rabbi Shestab, we will yet visit with you again next week, hopefully. Let me finish the thought, okay? Everybody hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. So here's the thought. Picture a piano, right? Try and visualize a piano. You see nice big Steinway grand piano. It's got the curve because people lean against it and they bend it, and it's shiny. And now imagine a pianist sit down at the piano and start to play a song. And listen to the song. So try and visualize listening to that song that's being played on the piano. And that can move you, right? It can sweep you away to somewhere else. And now the song stops. And the pianist gets up and walks away. You just heard the most beautiful song coming from that piano, and you want to hear more of it. So you run over to the piano and you start looking for the song. Well, are you going to be able to find the song in the piano? You won't find the song in the piano. The song came from the piano, but it's not something that you can actually find in the piano. You will see keys, you'll see wires, you'll see chords. You're not going to see any music, any notes, any music. That song is not there. It emanates from there, but it's not there. In a sense, this is a good analogy for the soul, where we look at each other. You can look at somebody's eyes. They say that you look into their eyes and you can see their soul, right? But you look at somebody else and you can see there's a whole person here. Now, often we can get distracted or just look at the external, look at the body, look at their appearance. But really, we know that there's a person that's been beyond that. So where is that person? Or who is that person? Who is that? There's a story about the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, who raised his grandson who would eventually succeed him in the third generation of Chabad leadership, known as the Tzemach Tzedek. So his Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the author of the Tanya, the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement, his daughter passed away at a young age, leaving a young 3-year-old orphaned child, and his grandfather raised him. So one day he's sitting in his office, and his grandson was playing with him, and he was sitting on his lap, and his grandfather says to the grandson, Rabbi Shneur Zalman says to his grandson, Menachem Mendel, he says, "Vu is Zayda? Where's Grandpa?" So the young child points to his face. So the grandfather says, "That's grandfather's face, but where's Grandpa?" So he points to his beard. The Alter Rebbe had a nice long beard. Points to his beard. He said, "That's Grandpa's beard." Anyway, the child is stumped. And so he goes off, and he's playing in the corner of the room, and suddenly he screams, Zaidi, Grandpa! His grandfather jumps up and turns around, thinking there was an emergency. He says, "There's Grandpa. There's grandfather." When he turned around to him, out of his concern, said, there he is. Right? So is that something you can point to? Is that something you can identify? We can identify our features, a face, a nose, an ear, a hand, right? But where are you? The you is in there, but it's not something we can touch and feel. The you, as we read before, is the soul. So now we know that the real you is not your body. The real you is your soul. The real I is my soul. But what's a soul? Right? We throw that word around plenty, but what is it? Jackie Mason, I think, said, he says he's making fun of the sophisticated people that go to the ballet and love to brag about being at the ballet, and he says, somebody, I go to the ballet. Look at me, I go to the ballet. He asked them, "What was it about?" "What was it about?" "It was about 2.5 hours." Right? But you go to the ballet, but what is the ballet, right? What was the story? What is it about? We throw these words around. What exactly is it? So what's the soul? So let's try and get some clues. Now, because the soul is not a physical thing, it's going to be hard for us to pinpoint. Just like the song in the meditation is not something physical. It's not something tangible. And it's not something you can see. So you know of its existence. You can be moved deeply by it, but you can't find it in the piano. The soul, which is in the body, animates the body and moves it and gives us makes us who we are. We look through the body, you can dissect it. You're not going to find the soul, but we can try to identify qualities of the soul to try and understand a little bit about the soul. So let's jump into the soul, and let's go to the primary source text, which is the Torah, the Bible. So let's see how the Torah discusses man and defines man. So let's take a look, right? So here we have the real me is my soul, not my body. Lovely. Text 3a. Now this is from Genesis chapter 2, right in the beginning. God formed the human of soil from the earth and breathed into his nostrils a neshama, a soul of life. And the human being became a living being. That's how God creates the human being, right? The human becomes a living being by forming human of soil from the earth and breathing into his nostrils a soul. How about animal formation, right? Which is an earlier verse in chapter 1, because the animals were created before humanity, before man. So text 3b, God said, "Let the earth bring forth living beings of different species, cattle, creeping things, and beasts of the earth, according to their species," and it was so. Yeah, so what's the difference? What's the difference between these two texts, between these two verses? What's the difference between the way God creates man and the way God creates animals? Stumped. Everybody stumped. Okay. The difference is, I'm sorry?
He didn't breathe in the soul.
Breathe the soul in. When God creates the animal, it's a one-step process, right? God creates an animal, one-step process. He creates the animal and there's an animal. He says, "Let there be a cow," and there's a cow walking around grazing in the field. But when God creates man, it becomes a two-step process. He forms man from the soil and breathes into his nostril a soul, right? So man is two separate things. Let's take a look at the Chizkuni, right? One of the leading early commentators on the Torah. He says like this, text 3c, God did what he had not done with any other creature. He blew into Adam with his Holy Spirit a neshama that is immortal and does not perish when the body does. right? So what does that mean? Let's unpack this for a second. What is he telling us here? Why the two-step process? So when God creates a world, and he speaks everything into existence. This is not a class about creation, so we're not going to focus on that. But he speaks everything into existence, and everything comes into existence, right? And even man, when it comes to man, he forms man, meaning his body, he forms it out of the soil, right? So he's creating something new, but it's created from the soil. But then it doesn't say that God creates the soul. He formed man, but he breathes the soul into his nostrils. Where did the soul come from? Nowhere does it say that God created the soul. Does that make sense? Nowhere does it say that God creates the soul, just that he breathed the soul into man. So where does that soul come from? The soul is a part of God. And since the soul is a part of God, the soul didn't have to be created. The soul is eternal. And the soul gets breathed into a body which was created, formed from the soil, a body that wasn't previously there, that is now there. Okay? So we've moved now from the real me is my soul, not my body. And finally, the real me, my soul, is eternal, so I am eternal. If I am my soul, and my soul is eternal, then so am I, right? So therefore, we can understand what Judaism says, that death is not the end of life. Life can't end. Life and death don't coexist. They can't go together. Something that's truly alive is eternal. And what is that? That would be God. That would be our soul as well, which is a part of God. Everything else is not eternal. Everything else, there's a time it wasn't, and then it came to be. So it's only temporary. And the true I, which is my soul, my neshama, that is something that's eternal, and therefore it's not something that can die. So that's step number one. Now let's try and make sense though of that, because if the soul doesn't die, if it's eternal, right? What does the soul desire? And let's try and get a little bit into, sort of the psyche of our souls. So let's take a look at an interesting text here to learn more about this eternal soul that we're now calling our definition, the real me. Right? Like Jackie Mason, it's also another routine from Jackie Mason. I'm dating myself here. You can tell I listened to him back in the 80s when he was funny. What does he say? He says he went to a therapist, he went to a psychologist, and the psychologist says to him, after he sat there, he says, this is not the real you. Now you owe me $100. He says, 1 second, if this is not the real me, maybe you're the real me, and maybe you owe me $100, right? So now we know the real me. The real me is my soul. And the soul is eternal. But let's take a look here at text 4 from the Midrash. Something very interesting about the soul and its journey down here into this world. So 40 days before the conception of a child, God summons the angel in charge of souls and tells him, bring before me a certain soul that is now in paradise. Its name is such and such, and its appearance is such and such. See, I guess angels can see souls. This is possible because all the souls that are born in this world were created on the day the world was created and exist until the end of time. The angel goes and brings the soul before God. The soul bows and prostrates itself before the Supreme King of Kings. God instructs the soul, please enter the seminal drop that is currently in the hands of the angel in charge of pregnancy. The soul protests, Master of the universe, I am quite satisfied with the world I inhabited since the day you created me. I am holy and pure, hewn from your throne of glory. Why do you wish to cause me to enter this putrid drop? That's the drama that's unfolding before a beautiful angelic child here is born. Okay, so now you might notice that it's talking about the soul being created. I just said that the soul is eternal because it's a part of God. What we're talking about is the soul being formed into its unique sort of being as a distinct soul. But the point is that it's unlike anything else that comes from nothing. Obviously, everything comes from God if God creates something out of nothing, but everything else is referred to as being something created from nothing, whereas the soul is not something created from nothing. In the Midrash here we just quoted, it's hewn from God's throne of glory, and even deeper than that, rooted in God's essence. So it's just that it takes on this persona of a soul. Okay, now let's take a look at the next, a quote from Ethics of Our Fathers. This world is like a corridor before the world to come. Prepare yourself in the corridor so that you may enter the palace. A single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. Okay, so what do these two texts tell us about the soul? They tell us that our soul does not want to come into this world, does not want to be born and enter a putrid drop and then come into this world. It tells us that all the pleasure, the world to come, this world's like it's only a corridor, right? Only a place that we enter before we enter the palace, and that a single moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. Think about all the pleasure we might have in this world, and a single moment in the world to come is greater than all of this. So why would the soul want to come into this world where it has to deal with all kinds of problems and challenges and hardship, has to come to this lowly place? So the soul desires to continue to just bask in the glory of God and to float around on the clouds and watch angels float by playing their harps, right? And have grapes dropped into its mouth. That's all the soul wants, and everything's great. Life is great. It's undisturbed. It's got no problems in heaven. And it doesn't look to come into this world. And then it looks at this world. This world is only the corridor to enter into the palace. So in a sense, from the second quote, from the quote of Ethics of Our Fathers, it seems like the soul was doing fine in heaven, but then it comes into this world so that it can go even deeper into the palace, maybe. Okay, so it goes through it. But it's at most, this world is just another stop in the journey that the soul is on. And not only is it just another stop, it's really just a blip, because what is 70, 80, 100 years, 120 years in when we're talking about eternity, right? So it's an insignificant moment in time for the soul. And even that insignificant moment is also, not only is it completely insignificant, but it's also inconvenient on top of it, right? I guess, I don't know if it's anyway, but the point is that it's also inconvenient. The soul seems to want no part of this world, right? So if we go back to our beautiful textbook here, to summarize where we're at now, right? The real me is my soul, not my body. The real me, the soul, is eternal, so I am eternal. And now, the third part of this, which is the real eternal me, is relatively unaffected by birth or death, right? So it's bothered, it's disturbed, doesn't want to come into this world, but really, this world is just a blip on the story of our soul. Now, by the way, you'll notice on the left here, you see it says there's like a little green icon with a camera. And What is Life by Rabbi Manis Friedman. I just so happened to notice this one, but you'll see throughout your textbook, you'll see these. If you go onto the myjli.com website, so myjli.com/soul, there are all these videos that complement the classes. And I would encourage you, for further study and insight, you can, once you get your book and you'll see these links, you can actually click on them or just enter them into your browser and find out some more. Okay, so we know that we just summarized, right? We are our soul. Our soul is eternal, and the soul is not really affected by death. So if the soul is not affected by death, and not and really life in this world seems to be just a minor inconvenience that's really insignificant, then what is our attitude? What should our attitude then be to death? Or maybe really more specifically, what should our attitude be to life in this world? So we've redefined the life of the soul as an eternal life. We know life as we know it is here in this world, right? In this experience, the soul and the body together. But what is, it's interesting, we say that one of the blessings, one of the morning blessings we make right when we wake up in the morning, and we also make this blessing every time we leave the restroom. Right after using the restroom, there's a blessing where we praise God for this wondrous body that He gave us. He gave us this wonderful body that works so perfectly, and we take it for granted until something goes wrong in the body. When there's a malfunction, suddenly we realize just how complex and delicate and brilliant this machine that our body, just how incredible it is. When it's running, when we're healthy, we don't feel anything. We just take it for granted. But of course, our sages are more insightful than that, and they knew to appreciate it. And so there's a blessing. So when we wake up in the morning and we can move and we have our functions about us, we make this blessing. When we go to the bathroom and everything is working properly, we make the blessing. But the blessing ends with the words, Maflilas, that God does wondrous things. So in the code of Jewish law, it discusses the meaning of that blessing, that God does wondrous things. What specifically is the blessing referring to when it says wondrous things? It's referring to the union between the body and the soul. The fact that God could put this soul and body together because they're really two opposites. We just talked about the soul and being eternal and wanting to bask in the glory of God and float around in fluffy clouds. And then there's this body that's sort of like dead weight that weighs it down. These are two different beings going in two different directions with two very different kinds of interests. And yet they remain sort of together during our lifetime. And so we have a special blessing to recognize the wonder of these two seemingly incompatible entities working so seamlessly together. So we have them together, but life, based on what we just said, it would seem then that life is really something that's not that important, it's not that significant, that our life and time in this world is really all about just, a minor inconvenience to go from the corridor into the palace. And so that's it. So death is really not terrible. If we are our soul, and if our soul is eternal, and if our soul continues to live, it doesn't die, it just changes its station. First it was in heaven, then it's down here on earth, and then it goes back to heaven or into the palace. Then there's nothing really significant or nothing really major that's happening with death. It's just changing, the soul's just changing its location. It's changing its mailing address. That's it. Which is potentially dangerous to say, because then we could really be flippant about our lives and not take it seriously. Interestingly, there's a great sage, Rabbi David ben Zimra, who lived in Morocco and in Egypt, among Muslims, and he had written. He wrote a commentary on Maimonides, on Rambam, Maimonides' codification of the commandments, and he writes that what he sees around him in the world around him, he sees among the religious people there that there's this absolute emphasis, a very strong emphasis on not mourning, not grieving. Why? Because the soul's eternal, it lives forever, it keeps going, and so to grieve somebody's passing and their death is completely unfounded. It's maybe a sign of weakness, maybe it's a sign of lack of faith, whatever that theology is and that religion would say. But he felt that it was completely wrong, that to totally not grieve or to minimize grieving is completely not Jewish. It's an un-Jewish thing. Now, to counter that, he also felt that excessive grieving was also completely not Jewish, right? Well, maybe we'll get more into these topics as we move on. But the point is that these attitudes, or an attitude of dismissing death or minimizing it as something that's not significant, people say, the soul's moved on to a better place, right? Which is supposed to bring some comfort, right? So here things were difficult, it's gone somewhere better. So if the soul's truly gone to somewhere better, if a moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world, then why are people upset or sad when somebody passes away? Right? That's a little open question. So and really there are a few ways to approach it, and we'll approach them also in the future. But it would beg that question, right? If we believe the soul lives forever, it doesn't die, it just moves on from the body, then what's the problem? So and more disturbing in a sense is life in this world at all meaningful or significant? Well, I shouldn't say meaningful, but is it at all significant or important? That's the question. Okay, so let's take a look now at text 6 and start to get the Jewish view, which always is more nuanced, right? So let's take a look here at text 6. Okay, and we're going to quote from Maimonides. We just mentioned the Radvaz, wrote a book on Maimonides. Let's take a look here at Maimonides, text 6, okay? If a non-Jew attempts to force a Jew to violate one of the Torah's commandments at the pain of death, the Jew should violate the commandment rather than be killed, because the Torah states concerning the mitzvahs, a person shall do them and live by them. One should live by them and not die because of them. This is a very famous law, which many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, that we see that mitzvahs, we know from a religious perspective, what's more important than your religious observance, right? Fulfilling or doing your religious rites, that's the most important thing for a religious person. But Judaism says no, that if there's a threat of death for performing one of these religious Jewish rites, then you don't perform that rite, you make sure to preserve life. Okay, so from this law, this is actually in Jewish law. From this law, it emerges that more important than religious observance, which, by the way, if we're connecting the dots, which I'm sure you are, the soul is interested in divine things. The soul is a heavenly creature that wants to be in heaven and wants to do heaven things, right? Heavenly things. And if the real me is my soul, and my soul is eternal, and my soul wants to, do godly things, well, what does the soul have to do in this world that's godly? God's will, right? The commandments. And yet we're told, no, hey there, Mr. Soul, hang on. If by doing that, there's a threat to your life, to the union between your body and your soul, and that will cause the separation and what we would call death, then you cannot engage in that religious action, that activity that's so familiar to you. You have to preserve life. So life is more important. The life of the body is even more important than the spiritual actualization of the soul. Okay? But let's make it even more confusing. Yeah? Let's go back to text 4 that we read before, and let's take a look here in right here in text 7, yeah? Text 7 is the conclusion of text 4, because of course, what we like to do here in our class is give you part of the text and not the full context, so like that we can keep you on till the end of the class. So let's go now to text 7, right? This is the end of what we had read before about the soul, right? We left off text 4 and finished with God talking to the soul, and the soul saying, I don't want to go, and God says, you're going in, and he's like, I don't want to go into this putrid drop. So what happens next? God hurries to reassure the descending soul. The world to which I am bringing you will prove more beneficial than the one you presently inhabit. Indeed, I formed you exclusively for the purpose of creating mortal life from this particular drop of seed. With that, God forcibly installs the soul, right? And then the rest, of course, is history. Now let's take a look at the next text, which is the text right before the text Ethics of Our Fathers. In Ethics of Our Fathers, we read in text 5 that a moment of bliss in the world to come is greater than all of this world. But what's it say before that? A single moment of repentance and of good deeds in this world is greater than all of the world to come. So what's going on here, right? How might we reconcile the value Judaism places on bodily life with its belief in the immortality of the soul? Anyone care to weigh in on that? Nobody?
So what you're saying is that being here on earth is much more important than being up in heaven with God.
Right.
Right?
So it's a little confusing what just happened, because first we're talking about the soul and that the soul is really not from here and wants no part of this place, right? Then we said, with second, the soul needs to be in the body, right? Then we said the soul is interested in divine things, but if it comes at the threat of death, you have to preserve the life of the body, the life of the soul in the body. Then we said that a moment of good deeds in this world is greater than all of the pleasure of the world to come. So we're kind of touching on a number of different, there are a couple of moving parts here that we have to really sort through, right? Performance of a mitzvah in this world is greater than all the bliss in the world to come, right? But even more important than the important task of performing a mitzvah is the mere life in this world itself, right? Lois, what do you want to say?
Does the soul being in the body help the soul to individuate, to define? I mean, is it totally defined soul before it enters the body, or does being in the body help it define itself and help it to evolve by the performance of mitzvot and good deeds? I mean, I was just talking to my friend today how she helped someone. She did a good deed by helping someone get their appointment for the COVID vaccine, and she said it made her feel so wonderful because she could help another person, and it's because it feels like it elevates your soul.
Right. So
or you contact your soul when you do good deeds.
Right. So we already said, right, that this world is like the corridor that leads into the palace, right? Which means that it's the soul definitely is enhanced, right? Or in the words of the mystics, it's Yerida Tzayir Chaliyah, that the soul has a descent into this world for an ascent. The purpose of it is an ascent to even higher. Now, there's
Yeah.
a conflicting, well, it's not really conflicting, talking to two aspects of it. There's another statement by the mystics that the soul does not need any perfecting, right? So that's to really the first point you mentioned about, does the soul need to individuate? The soul is a fully formed individual being. In fact, if anything, you would say that the soul's disturbance, what bothers the soul, is its sense of self, right? It sees itself as a part of God and wants to just melt away into God. It doesn't want to be, it doesn't want to individuate, it doesn't want to break away and feel its own individual sense. That would be painful to the soul, right? But it's still a fully formed a consciousness, and it's perfect. It doesn't need any help. It's already perfect where it is before it comes down to this world. So certainly it comes down. Obviously, there's going to be a benefit afterwards as well, right? But on its own, it's already perfect. So if the soul's already perfect, and then what's the whole point of it coming down here, right? So what's the point? The point is, what emerged from what we just read is life in this world, life itself, and specifically the purpose of fulfilling commandments, performing God's will in this world. That's the whole purpose of everything. And that's why the soul is actually sent down to this world. Because the soul itself is perfect. The soul doesn't need any tinkering, doesn't need any enhancements, it doesn't need any, it doesn't need plastic surgery, the soul. It's perfect, just as it is. It doesn't need to be enhanced in any way. And yet, it comes down to this world. Why? Because more important than the soul's perfection is fulfilling its purpose. And what's its purpose? Its purpose is to make this world a godly place. How? By fulfilling God's will in this world. There's a story about the Chayz of Lublin, one of the great Hasidic masters, who was before Yom Kippur, and he says, anybody have anything that they really want, you can come tell me what it is, and I could pray for you, and it's going to happen. And so one of his students came over to him, and was brave enough, and he said, my prayer is that I want to be able to survive in this world by working just one day a week and spend the other 6 days immersed in prayer and study. So the Chayz sort of rebuked him and said, that's a foolish prayer, because if that's what you want out of this life, you had that before you were born. That's not what God intended for you, right? To sit all day, every day, sitting and praying and meditating and studying, that you had in heaven. Now we have 6 work days and one Shabbos day. And certainly we have to do these things every day. But the point is that we're here in this world to work this world, to make this world a divine home. So putting it in those terms, if the purpose is that God wants to have a relationship with us, and he wants it in this world, so for that reason, he sends our soul down into this world to fulfill his will in this world, and that's how he has this relationship with us, then now we can start to appreciate the value of life in this world and understand why really we started by saying that our life in this world is just a blip in time. It's an insignificant moment and perhaps even an inconvenience for the soul. The soul doesn't even want to be born. But if the purpose of everything is for God to relate to us here in this physical world, if that's the purpose of everything, then suddenly this life becomes the most important place, the most important stage in the soul's entire eternal existence. Does that make sense?
No,
Doesn't make sense.
no,
Okay.
because God could have created the world perfect without the need for tikkun olam, without the need for us to make it a holy place. He could have created it already holy.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. He could have. So why didn't he?
I don't know. You tell me.
Because he wanted us to partner with him, so like that we can be in a relationship together. So that's exactly why he didn't create a perfect world.
For his sake. He wanted a relationship with us for his sake or for our sake or for both.
Well, of course for his. It started with him. He wanted a relationship with us because that's what he wants. But I don't know that but ultimately it's a mutually beneficial relationship. I'm not sure there's no downside to him wanting a relationship with us for his sake. It tells us how highly he thinks of us, how important we are to him. Does it not?
Rabbi,
Yes.
question. Obviously, if the soul is effectively what the essence of everything is, and the body is just a vehicle for that, then doesn't God already have a relationship with the soul in the plane that it was in before it came down here? So what is God trying to accomplish by having the soul come down here to have a relationship with God if God already has a relationship with the soul in another plane of existence?
Good question. So I think this is really, this idea of the purpose of creation is not really tonight's topic, and there's a lot to say about it, and it's really sort of the central idea of Chabad Hasidic philosophy, actually. But let's just do it in brief, and as it relates to what we're saying. The soul, before it comes down into, let's actually, we'll start answering a question, a text I was going to skip, but let's actually look at this text, okay? And we'll go from, and then we'll go from there. And then I'll try and finish answering the question. Take a look at text 9 from the Talmud, not a mystical text, right? God created the universe on a condition. If the Jews accept the Torah, he told the universe, you will continue to exist. If they do not, I will return you to nothingness. This is the Talmud. Okay? What very strong statement. What does that statement mean? What is the Talmud trying to tell us? The purpose of all of this is God desired to be in a relationship with us in this world, in this lowly world. Now, you say he already had a relationship with us? Yeah, because we are an extension of him, right? We said the soul is cut from God's essence. It's cut from that cloth. So, and the soul, while it does have a certain sense of individuality, its own consciousness, but it always feels, it's always aware of God. It's never disconnected from God, right? It's an extension from God. And so therefore, it doesn't satisfy God's desire in creation. Why? Or to put it the way Lois said, God could have created a perfect world. What would be the problem with creating a perfect world, or creating a world even just with souls? Forget about the angels, forget about anything else, just a world of souls. The problem would be then that there would be no way for us to contribute to that relationship. There'd be no way for us to seek out God and to connect with God, right? So like you asked, for whose benefit, right? Why did God desire this relationship with us? Is it for his benefit or for our benefit, right? So it's for his benefit, right? But the point is that we then come to pursue him for our own benefit, recognizing that's what we want as well. And that's exactly what he wants. He appreciates, God enjoys the dichotomy of something that on the one hand seems to be estranged or distant, and on the other hand overcomes all of those challenges and obstacles to connect with him. Right? So when the soul is a soul in heaven and it basks in the glory of God, it doesn't really feel distant, it doesn't feel estranged from God, right? And therefore, yeah, if you're floating around on clouds in heaven, life is good. There's no problem, there's no challenge. And therefore, I don't really know if you're in it, you can be when you have everything handed to you on a silver spoon and you're just coasting through, so there's no real indication that you have any kind of character of your own, right? It's when you face some challenges and adversity that you have to overcome that you can then start to show that this is important to you, right? So God creates us. He desires to have this relationship with us, and we don't know if we desire the same thing until we're down here in this world. And we start to live a purposeful life and start to seek God in this world. When that happens, now already we're saying something about this relationship, that we went in on this relationship with God, that it's not something that was just imposed upon us. Yeah, that makes sense? So if God just creates souls or just creates a perfect universe, then it's all just dictated by him. And we have no say, and we're going to go along with the flow, and we will have no there wouldn't even be an option not to go along with that plan. And not in some negative kind of ruthless way, but just because in the face of that, why would there be any other option? There is no other option.
But is that where free will comes into play?
Yes, that's why God gives us free will. Exactly. One of the greatest gifts God gives us, and this is, again, we're not going to go off on free will now, But you think about it, at least let's just talk about it conceptually for a moment. Free will means I have the opportunity to reject God. So God could have created a universe that everything bows to him and everything listens to him and everything. And the truth is, all of his creation actually does that. All of creation does bow to God and does nothing, doesn't deviate from an iota of God's plan. It does all about him. And God finds it boring and uninteresting. You know who God's fascinated with? Us, who he gave free choice, knowing full well that we can just turn our shoulder, right? We can just ignore him. It's terrifying for him on the one hand and exhilarating on the other hand. And when we find him, we turn to him, that's the ultimate satisfaction for him. Okay, so here we see that the idea that the to go back to the text from Ethics of Our Fathers, right? There's a moment of bliss in the world to come is certainly more pleasurable than all of this world, but it's one moment of repentance and good deeds in this world that's far more important than all of the world to come. Why? Because all of the world to come, both the soul's pre-life life and the soul's post this world life are blissful. They're wonderful. The soul loves it, and yet they're kind of unimportant and uninteresting. Because where is the center stage of creation, of reality? Where is God's interest? And where's the place where all of this action takes place? Is in this physical world, in that moment in time when the soul and the body are united. Okay? So having said that, we can have a better appreciation of the Jewish value of life, right? Because we had said that if the soul's eternal and it just goes from one location to the other, so then what's the difference? What's the great tragedy of death? And then why is life at all meaningful? And yet we've concluded that death is not the end. And nevertheless, even though death is not the end, nevertheless, we value life more than anything. Why? Because while death is not the end of the soul and the end of the soul's life, but life in this world is the most important part of the soul's existence. And therefore, we value life above everything else. Okay, let's take a look at an interesting text, okay? I just unshared, I'm sharing, I hope I'm not making anybody dizzy. Let's share this next text. This is a text from the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, who just this past Shabbos, so just a few days ago, we observed his 71st yard site. He passed away 71 years ago on 10th of Shvat, 1950. And he was a living legend during his lifetime because he had stood up to the communist regime. He was in Russia, and the communists wanted to wipe out any vestige of religion, and the Jewish communists in particular were extra motivated to stamp out any last trace of Judaism. I think the communists recognized that even though they there's no religion, communism is atheism, is a form of you don't believe in anything other than the state, and yet they realized Judaism was the most formidable challenge and their greatest threat. Right, so they sought to stamp out religion in general, but Judaism really in particular, and they were ruthless. And in fact, so Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who was the Chabad Rebbe, the leader of the Chabad movement at the time, he led a war against the communists. Whenever they closed the school, a Jewish school, he opened the one in secret. They closed up a mikveh, he opened another one somewhere else. He was constantly, and he had his students, his followers, they all put their lives on the line, and many of them actually were executed, and many of them were sent away for hard labor in the Russian Gulag for many, many years. They endured terrible suffering in their fight against the communists. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak himself in 1927 is finally arrested by them. He's sent to prison. He was facing the death penalty, and he had been, in fact, sentenced to death, but miraculously, it's a whole long story, not for now, he was saved. But he writes a firsthand account of his experience when he was arrested. So let's take a look here at text 11. This is him speaking first voice. He's writing about a firsthand account of his arrest. It's a fascinating book. I would encourage anybody, if you wanted to pick it up. The Heroic Struggle is a really fascinating read of his firsthand account of his arrest. Okay. I arrived for interrogation at the offices of the Soviet GPU, which is the precursor to the NKVD, which is the precursor of the KGB, right? So the GPU. However, in keeping with my principles, I was not very cooperative. One of the interrogators, he writes in his diary, how he had made this decision that he was not going to bend to them, he was not going to break, he was not going to cower. And so therefore he was going to do what he was going to do. And so even though he spoke Russian, he refused to respond to them in Russian. And he was going to act completely uncooperative, right? That's what he says here, right? I was not very cooperative. That was one of his strategies when he was taken to prison. One of the interrogators raised a revolver that sat on the desk before him. He looked me in the eye and mockingly said, "This small toy has incredible powers. It causes principles to melt away. It opens mouths. Under its spell, even mutes have become talkative." I responded, "You are quite mistaken. That toy only has an effect on faint-hearted non-believers, those with one world and multiple gods. We, on the other hand, have one God and two worlds. As such, I don't panic at the sight of your toy. It has no effect on me whatsoever." Okay, this is a really, this is more of this in his account, more of these kinds of nuggets. So he says, I'm not afraid of death. He says, you have one world and many gods. And by many gods, he doesn't necessarily mean gods like as in many deities. He was saying, he was talking to communists who didn't believe in any gods. His point was the gods meaning all of your toys and all of your possessions and everything that you think that you're amassing and hoping for in this world, all of those gods. So you have many of those gods and only one world. So that toy is very scary. But for a Jew who has only one God and two worlds, it's not scary. So here we're going to start to already appreciate, now that we've kind of understood a little bit about the nature of the soul's eternity, the fact that ultimately this world, our attitude to life in this world is that we take it extremely seriously, in fact, more serious than any other stage of the soul's life. So then the question becomes, should we be afraid of death? Right? If this world is where all the action is, and we appreciate life and we don't want to die, so should we be paralyzed by that fear? So here we have a little insight already where the Rebbe says he doesn't fear death because he has two worlds. It's not the end, right? So as you see, obviously, as the theme that's emerging, though, is also that the answer is always sort of nuanced, right? When we talk about death, it's not that we're afraid of death because we know the soul's eternal lives on. The issue with death is that we don't want to die because we appreciate the importance of life, but we're not afraid of death because it's not the end of life. Let's take a look. Text 12 actually is sort of an interesting text that sort of bears this point as well. Let's take a look here at text 12 from the Talmud. Okay. When Rabbi Judah the prince fell ill and lay on his deathbed, Rabbi Chia entered and found him weeping. "My master," exclaimed Rabbi Chia, "why do you weep? Was it not taught if one dies smiling, it is a good sign for him, while weeping, it is a bad sign, and if he dies while weeping, it's a bad sign for him?" Rabbi Judah replied, "I weep because of my inability to study the Torah and observe the commandments after death." That's what Rabbi Judah says. Imagine you walk into a room of somebody who's on their deathbed and they're crying. With the first question that pops to your mind is, why are you crying? It would seem to be kind of obvious, right? But no, so we gain insight here into the Jewish perspective and attitude, both almost as much from the question as from the answer. Right? Rabbi Chia says, what are you crying about? That's so un-Jewish. You're going to die. You're going to die. There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be worried about. What are you crying? Right? That's already, so it tells us a lot. But what's his answer? Why is he crying? He's not crying because he's afraid of dying. He's not crying because of death. He knows it's not the end of life. He's crying because what's going to be with all the Torah and the mitzvahs? This is where the action is. This is where things happen. So he's not crying about death. He's crying about the end of the chance to really make an impact and to make a difference, right? He recognized that his mission is complete, and the mission, that's where all the fun is. That's where all the action is. That's where the meaning is, the purpose is. And so this is the Jewish perspective. On the one hand, who are we? We are our soul, and our soul is eternal, and something that's eternal cannot die. So the soul doesn't die. It's here, it's there, and it's back somewhere else, but it doesn't die, it lives on forever. And having said that, our time in this world is the most important and precious time because this is where we fulfill the purpose of all of creation. It's not in heaven, it's here in this world. We don't want to go to heaven. We want to stay here in this world. So we don't want to die. And we take life very seriously and we preserve life at all costs, right? But we're also not afraid of death. Because as we said, the soul is eternal and lives on, and life continues. Now, we still need to but we should clarify that a little bit more. I feel like that's necessary, and that's really the last link in tonight's class, is really defining then, so what is life exactly, right? How do we now define the life that is eternal, the one that we experience in this world, and the one that we hopefully take with us in the world to come? So let's take a look here at an interesting text, again from the Talmud. Any questions? Or I'm not really coming up for air. Anybody have any questions? Comments? No. Okay, good. Let's go. Text 13. The Talmud says, after their demise, tzaddikim, righteous people, are referred to as being alive. Okay, after their demise, after their passing, the righteous are referred to as alive. Right? So we don't, when somebody passes away, a righteous person passes away, even after death, we can refer to them as being alive. Why? What does the Talmud mean by this? How is the Talmud defining life? If they passed away, the Talmud itself says after their demise. So if they've demised, so what are you calling them alive? Did I just make up that word? No. Yes, maybe. Okay. So why, what does it mean that they're alive? So we could say that they're alive because they have a legacy. Right now, you think about a legacy. Think about the things that a person does during their lifetime that live on after they pass away. Right. So think about somebody who's philanthropic, and you make a big donation that goes to do whatever, to build a big center, community center, to put somebody through. Let's say you give a donation to put somebody through college, that they then get a job or whatever. After the donor passes away, their activities are still paying dividends. They're still going on. That kindness, that charity is still working in this world, right? So we see that even after they've passed, they're still making an impact in this world. They're still having it. They're still having an impact. But there's something even deeper than that. Because true, the good things that I do in this world, the good things that a person does in this world, those are eternal. Those are godly acts. If a person who studies Torah does mitzvahs, since they're godly acts, so they're eternal. They're eternal acts. Good deeds are eternal acts that endure forever. And in a sense, even practically, you can even kind of, literally say that a person who's passed away is still here, is still alive, because they're living through their impact that still continues. But if you look at the Talmud says the righteous are called alive, right? Which gives us a little bit more, another clue here, which is there's something more to just the good deeds that we leave behind that continue. What happens? What changes when a person passes away? If the true me is my soul, then the person passes away, the soul is still intact, is still the same, it's the same person. So what changes? What changes is that the physical body, right, the thing that housed and contained the soul is no more, right? That's the separation between the body and the soul. By the way, next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. It's not as simple as I'm making it now. We're going to take a closer look at that statement next week. But the point is that there's that separation. So the people that we know in our lives we know them as soul and a body. When the soul leaves the body, now we can't really relate to them or access them in the same way, right? So we're saying their impact remains. But if the righteous, what kind of life do the righteous live? Let's take a look at next text here to see what kind of life, when we say somebody's righteous in the Talmud or in Jewish tradition, what are we talking about? So take a look here, text 14 from the Tanya. The life of the tzaddik, the righteous person, is not corporeal, but spiritual, consisting of faith, reverence, and love of God. This reality is reflected in the following passages. Of faith, it is stated that tzaddik lives by his faith. Of reverence, it's stated, reverence of God produces life. Of love, it is stated, he who pursues charity and kindness will find life, and kindness is rooted in love. Now, obviously, there's a lot to unpack in this statement. We're not gonna unpack it fully, but the point is, he says, what's the life of the tzaddik? The righteous person's life, three things: faith, awe of God, and love of God. Those are the three ingredients, the three driving forces in the tzaddik's life. And he brings scriptural verses to show how each of these things are called life in scripture. Okay, so these are defining life values or ideals. And this is the life of the tzaddik. So if that's the case, if the tzaddik's whole life, his whole life can be summed up in these three things, that what is his life? His life is awe of God and fear of God, right? And faith, then what changes after he passes away? What dies? What separates from the tzaddik's sort of being and personality when he passes away? Only an external show. But the life itself remains completely unchanged. To put in other words, the more that we can identify with our soul, and as we said, what does our soul want? Our soul is in tune with God and wants to fulfill its purpose and connect to God. And so when the soul is in heaven, it has an easy path. It sees God. It just sits there and just delights in God's presence. It comes into this world and suddenly it doesn't see God. And so it starts searching for God and starts trying to push its way through the limits of this physical world to try and connect with God. How does it do that? By performing mitzvahs, by studying Torah, by having his acts motivated by a love and awe of God, and living with deep faith. When the soul does that in this world, it's living a soulful life. And when anybody comes in contact with such a person, what do they see? They don't see a regular human. You see a soul, but how it's clothed in the body. But the body almost doesn't really conceal the soul. You know, it's one of the fascinating things to me. It's like, I grew up in Crown Heights. I grew up literally in the Lubavitcher Rebbe's synagogue. As a little kid, watching him pray, sitting at his Farbrengens and watching him speak and teach. And we didn't have a subject in school where we talked about the Rebbe or analyzed him. There was no such subject. And at home, we didn't sit down and talk about the Rebbe or his greatness. I just saw it. I was just there. I'd go to the shul. I saw him, and you saw him, and you knew that there was a God. I don't know how else you could describe it. This is a human being he looks like everybody. He's got a face, and he's got a beard, and he's got a body, and he's wearing clothes. And yet, you just didn't see physical. You saw divine. That's what you saw. And a tzaddik, really, not to get too off topic, a tzaddik really, Alter Rebbe finds actually in Tanya, the tzaddik really is somebody, or what is holiness? Holiness is something that's invisible. Holiness is something that just shows you what it's connected to, God, right? So for a person to be a holy person, a tzaddik, a truly righteous person, the more righteous you are, the more invisible you almost are, right? So it's like sort of counterintuitive, but when the more soulful we can live, right? Just think about it. We started the class in the meditation. We talked about you can't see the soul, right? Can't see a song. You see the piano, not the song, right? The song is invisible. Our soul, we see the body, and we see how it animates the soul and enlivens the body and animates the body, but we can't see the soul itself is invisible. And you know what happens when you live a more soulful life? You start to become invisible. Not invisible that insignificant or not impactful. Invisible in the sense that suddenly people become more aware of something higher when they're around you. Something beyond the finite and the corporeal and the physical and the mundane. So what happens when the righteous pass away? It's not just that there is an impact of their teachings, their legacy, their deeds. Sure, that's true. That's true really of everybody, for sure. Some people more, some people less. But the tzaddik is alive almost in the exact same way as he was before. Obviously not the exact same way. And obviously there are other issues that we'll address in other classes as well with that statement. But the point is, looking at it from a philosophical sort of perspective, that life remains exactly the same. Death doesn't change anything about the life that was being lived even while in this world. Does that make sense? I hope so. Too mystical? Not so much. We're going to talk about that. What do you think we're going to talk about? Okay, let's read another text there, because the truth is, this is something now that we have to really think about and something we have to internalize, right? If we can know how we define ourselves, then we can define life, what life really is, and what eternal life is. So now we can appreciate maybe living that kind of life, living real life. So let's take a look here at text 15. As I bring up the text, there's the Alter Rebbe. We keep quoting the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement. Here's his picture, right? Because we just quoted from his text. So this is his picture, right? We told the story about him and his grandson. So he had a chassid, a follower, one of his students, who he blessed, Rabbi Shea Zalman blessed him with long life. His name was Yekusia Lepler, Rabbi Lepler, let's call him. And he says right away to his master, his teacher, he says, but not empty years. So you can ask if your Hasidic master, your teacher, is giving you a blessing, and you certainly believe in the power of his blessing, and is giving you a blessing for long life. What are you starting to negotiate? Say amen and move on. What are you stipulating? Nobody asked your opinion, and yet there's something very profound in the story. He wasn't making any conditions. He wasn't negotiating. When his teacher told him, "I want to bless you with long life," the chassid immediately clarified the blessing, and he said, "Not empty years," meaning, and he actually said, "Not years, not life when you don't see godliness and you don't feel godliness and you're not sensitive to the divine mission." He was basically defining the blessing. That if you want to bless me with life, well, what's life? Life is a godly life, a life that's lived in service of God. That's life. Otherwise, it's not life. To live to over 100, which he lived to, I think, over 100. This is a few hundred years ago when the lifespan was much shorter. But to not be in tune and in sync with your divine purpose and with your soulful part of your life, to him, that was not life at all, right? That was just sitting around waiting to die. And so what is a soulful kind of life? Let's take a look here at text 15. Behold, this is a text from Rabbi Shalom Dober of Lubavitch, the fifth Chabad Rebbe. He says like this. He's the father. Here's his photograph taken in 1920 in Russia, right before he passed away, a few months before he passed away. He's the father of Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who we just quoted from with the imprisonment and the gun, the toy, and the two worlds. So he says like this. Behold, the verse in Deuteronomy says like this. Behold, I have set before you today life and goodness and death and evil. Choose life. Right? Why? So he says like this. The term life in this verse does not refer to corporeal life, nor does death refer to the result of the soul's departure, for which simpleton needs to be instructed to choose to live. Right? So when God says, I placed life and death before you, choose life, why would God have to tell us to choose life? Everybody would choose life over death. Right? So clearly we're not talking about this kind of life and death. Rather, each creation, while alive and fully existent, contains both life and death. The physicality of the object is intrinsically lifeless. It is in a constant state of decline and deterioration. We observe this decline in every physical object, as well as in ourselves. Our physical capabilities and powers weaken with time. By contrast, the spiritual and divine within each thing is alive, eternal, and not subject to destruction or deterioration, God forbid. Right? So this is the meaning of choose life. Choose life means to live more in tune with the spiritual, with the soul, rather than the physical. The physical is lifeless, right? If we recall going right back to one of our first texts, where God creates everything, right? Brings everything up from nothingness, and then everything, once he creates it, starts to revert back to its nothingness, starts to go back to what it was, which was lifeless. Even the body itself, God forms the body from the soil, and what's the body do? It grows. It says there's a statement of the sages that a child, the moment he's born, is already starting to shrivel. Right? We're already starting, the dying process starts the moment the person's born. Right? But that's true of the body, not true of the soul. And so therefore, we need to be told there's life and there's death, meaning there's something higher, there's purpose, that's eternal, that's life, because life is eternal. If it's not eternal, it's not life. Right? That's eternal, and death is temporary. Death is something that is created. That is something that's lifeless. And so choose life. Choose the spiritual path. And by the spiritual path, I don't mean an ascetic life of escaping the physical. No, as we said, life in this world, the soul and the body is important. But choose those tasks, the things for which the soul is put in the body, the purpose for which all of this is created. And if we can do that, and we can make those choices every day, then we can start to appreciate that we can start to live eternally even now. So going back to, we quoted the Mishnah, right? Because there's something puzzling. If we want to get technical with the text that we were quoting, there's something still a little puzzling, which is, having said all that, let's go back to that Mishnah from the teaching of Ethics of Our Fathers, which says that this world is like a corridor. Prepare yourself in the corridor to enter the palace. Yeah, what does that mean? if this world is where it's at, if this is where it's important, if this life and this world, this is center stage, then what are we preparing to go to? Where are we going? So the point is, we get a deeper insight into this, which is not that the world to come is more important or the ultimate destination that we're trying to get to, but to the contrary, to recognize, to live like we're in the palace already here in the corridor. That makes sense? Or putting in the words of going back to the previous Rebbe. Let's go back to that quote, because it's the same kind of, it gives us the same kind of problem. He says, this toy, the revolver, doesn't scare somebody who has one God and two worlds. So what was he saying? Doesn't that run contrary to what the what we quoted from Maimonides, that you shouldn't die, you should live? So if the communists, those terrible, evil people are telling you to speak, if it'll save your life, doesn't that override whatever strategy you have to defeat them, right? In a sense. And yet, what was he saying? He was saying that the two worlds can exist simultaneously. So you're talking about ending a physical life. I'm not living a physical life, even now. And so it doesn't frighten me. Not that, oh, you'll kill me now, I'll catch you later. I'm going to a better place. I'm not going to a better place. And he didn't want to die. But his point was that you can't, that the threat of physical death can't scare somebody who's not overly concerned with living a physical life. He's living an otherworldly life. He's living already in the palace in the world to come while living in this world. And so therefore, we can now sort of appreciate the Jewish perspective on life and death, how we value life and how we view death as not the end, but merely another step beyond life in this physical world. And most importantly, perhaps, what emerges from all of this is an appreciation of our immortality, which should motivate us to start living like immortal beings already in this world. And ultimately, taking a page from the tzaddik, from the righteous, who we talked about before, to live a truly righteous life, then the change that occurs with the separation of body and soul and death is not a very drastic one, and not even a very shocking one, because you've already been living that soulful life already before. Now, we can all do this, in steps. This is not an all or nothing. I say this all the time. Judaism is not a zero-sum game, and it's not like I'm either here or I'm there. Every day we're called upon to choose life, right? That's the verse we quoted from Deuteronomy. I place before you today meaning right now. God's placing before us life and death. Choose life. He's asking us to do that every day and every moment of every day. Whenever we have a choice to make, if we chose death before, we can still choose life. As long as we're here, we still have a purpose, we still have a mission, and we can continue to choose that and to live in that way. So that pretty much wraps up tonight's class. It's 9:30 on the nose. Talk about timing. We'll open it up to some questions. If there are any loose ends that you feel that we're not tied up, you can unmute yourself and ask any questions and comments. And next week, we're actually going to start talking about the process of death. What happens at that process and the journey that the soul goes through during those moments. So that will be what we're going to start to explore, God willing, next week.